there is a ticket somewhere in Toronto that tells a much bigger story than the price printed on it. A few months ago, that ticket might have cost around 40 Canadian dollars. Then, the schedule appeared. Within roughly 30 minutes, the demand had changed everything. Around 3,100 tickets were sold in that window, and the available inventory disappeared. The name attached to that session was Alex Eala. Not Coco Gauff, not Elena Rybakina, not Aryna Sabalenka, Alex Eala, a 20-year-old from the Philippines who was still outside the world's top 20 when those tickets vanished. And that is where this story gets interesting, because this is not really a story about one tennis match. It is about what happens when an athlete becomes bigger than the expectations surrounding her. It is about a community discovering a reason to fill an entire stadium. And most importantly, it is about a tournament realizing that the old formula for predicting tennis popularity may no longer be enough. The 5 days surrounding this moment tell the story better than any headline could. On August 3rd in Washington, Eala defeated world number 3 Jessica Pegula in the final and became the first player from the Philippines, male or female, to win a double-ta singles title. 2 days later, she walked onto center court in Toronto for the first time in her career. The stadium was sold out, and she defeated Alicia Parks in 3 sets. Then came August 7th. Eala faced Katie McNally in Toronto. She won the opening set 6-3. Then her body started sending a completely different message. Her foot required medical attention multiple times. Her movement became visibly restricted. McNally fought back, forced a deciding set, and suddenly the player who had become Toronto's biggest attraction was fighting simply to stay on the court. That is the compression of this story. Champion on Monday, sellout on Wednesday, survivor on Friday. And somehow, the most important part had not even happened yet. Because the tension here is not Alex Eala against Coco Gauff. In fact, Gauff has repeatedly spoken positively about what Eala is doing. She has described the atmosphere surrounding Eala's matches as something special, even comparing the energy to basketball and major international sporting events. Gauff has also spoken about how one player can connect an entire nation to a sport that previously did not have the same representation there. That changes the entire conversation. The tension is not personal, it is structural. For years, tennis tournaments have operated around a familiar hierarchy. The biggest names attract the biggest crowds. Grand Slam champions command premium attention. Top-ranked Americans dominate the North American market. Established stars sell tickets before almost anyone else. But Toronto produced a different result. Eala's session became one of the hottest tickets in the building, and that happened before she had even reached the point in her career where most people would expect that level of commercial attention. That is the part people should pay attention to. Because when thousands of people buy tickets faster than a tournament expects, that is not just excitement. It is information. It tells the tournament where the demand is. It tells sponsors where the audience is. And it tells the sport that something has changed. Roughly 3,100 tickets moving in around 30 minutes is not simply a fan club reaction. It is a market signal. The Filipino community had reportedly been contacting the tournament for months, asking when Eala would play, who she would face, and where her match would take place. Then the schedule finally arrived, and the waiting ended. The tickets disappeared. That is why the 10,077-seat center court matters so much. This was not a tiny court hidden somewhere inside the grounds. This was the largest stage the tournament could offer, and the Filipino community filled it. Then they came back. And they brought the same energy again. Secondary reports also indicated that some tickets were appearing on resale platforms at significantly higher prices than their original value. Those individual resale figures should be treated as reported rather than independently confirmed. But the larger reality was obvious. Demand had overtaken supply. And it happened around a player who had never appeared at this tournament before. Now comes the person whose opinion carries particular weight. Tournament director Carl Hale has spent close to 2 decades watching the biggest names in tennis arrive in Toronto. He has seen superstar crowds. He has watched champions pull thousands of people toward the same court. He knows what a major tennis audience normally looks like. And during this tournament, Hale described Eala as an absolute blessing to tennis. More importantly, he explained that the Filipino support was not something the tournament suddenly discovered that week. The community had been reaching out months earlier. Think about what that means. This wasn't simply a viral moment created by one big victory. The audience was already waiting. Eala's Washington title did not create that connection. It exposed it. And when Toronto gave those fans a date, a court, and a time, they responded immediately. But here is where the story becomes much bigger than ticket sales. A ticket rush means very little if the player cannot back it up on court. Eala has. On August 3rd, she came from behind to defeat Jessica Pegula, then ranked world number 3 in the Washington final. She closed the match by winning the deciding set 6-0. That was her 7th victory over a top 10 opponent during the season. 2 days later, she became the first Filipino player, man or woman, to win a main draw match at the National Bank Open. And after that victory, Eala spoke about feeling at home in Toronto because of the support around her. That sentence mattered, because this wasn't simply a player receiving applause. It was an athlete walking into an unfamiliar tournament and immediately seeing people who felt connected to her story. Then the ranking finally started telling the same story as the crowds. Eala climbed to world number 20. A career high. The first Filipino player of the Open era to reach the WTA top 20. Suddenly, 3 different things were moving together. The results were improving, the ranking was rising, and the audience was expanding. For most young players, those developments happen separately. Eala's career has reached a point where they are happening at the same time. And then Toronto put all 3 inside one stadium. But just when the story seemed to be becoming a celebration, the court gave us another twist. August 7th, Katie McNally. Eala took the first set 6-3. Then came the foot problem. She received treatment. She lost momentum. McNally recovered. The second set slipped away. Suddenly, the crowd was watching something completely different. This was no longer a celebration of a new star. This was a test of whether the new star could survive. McNally forced the deciding set. Eala could have folded. Instead, she broke in the opening game. And then she protected that advantage. Game after game. Point after point. Until the final score read 6-3, 5-7, 6-4. That is the image that should stay with this entire story. Not simply thousands of people buying tickets. Not simply a ranking number. Not even the Washington Trophy, a young player with a compromised foot inside a sold-out stadium, refusing to let the moment disappear. And the stadium responded. The same people who had bought those tickets weeks earlier were now watching every point with even greater intensity. The audience had become part of the match. And that brings us back to Coco Gauff, because Gauff's comments provide an important outside perspective. She has described Eala as someone helping connect tennis with a nation that had not previously seen this level of representation. That is powerful, because Gauff is not speaking as a fan sitting in the crowd. She is speaking as one of the leading players in the world. She understands what it means to create attention. She understands what it means to play in front of huge crowds. And she recognized something different happening around Eala. The sport is watching, the players are watching, the tournaments are watching, and the Filipino community is watching most of all. There is also another fascinating layer waiting in Toronto. Leylah Fernandez, Canadian, Filipino heritage through her mother, and now potentially standing between Eala and another deep run. The two already faced each other in Washington, where Eala came through in straight sets. Now their paths have crossed again. This time, the stage is Toronto. This time, the crowd is different, because both sides of the stadium can see something familiar in the players. One represents Canada, the other represents the Philippines, and both carry Filipino heritage into a sport that is suddenly paying very close attention to the country. That is why the next match matters. Not because Eala has suddenly become unbeatable. She hasn't. She is still only 20. She still has weaknesses. She has already experienced losses against elite opposition. Earlier this season, she lost to Gauff in Dubai. She also opened the Australian season with a loss to Alicia Parks before later defeating her in Toronto. Those results matter because they keep the story grounded. Eala is not a finished superstar. She is still developing. She is still learning how to manage pressure. And now, she is learning how to carry something much heavier than a tennis racket. Expectation. The expectations are growing because the results are growing. The crowds are growing because the connection is growing. And the spotlight is growing because everyone now wants to know what happens next. That is the real challenge. Winning one title is difficult. Winning another match after becoming the center of an entire country's attention is something else entirely. And Eala is learning that lesson in real time. Think about where she was only months ago. Now look at Toronto. A 10,077-seat stadium, thousands of tickets disappearing within minutes. A tournament director describing the reaction as something he had never experienced in 2 decades. A top-ranked star publicly praising the impact she is having. A Filipino community turning tennis matches into national events. And a 20-year-old player standing in the middle of all of it. This is bigger than one result. The Washington title created history. Toronto revealed the scale of the audience behind it. And the combination may force tennis tournaments to reconsider how they measure a star. Because sometimes the ranking tells you who the best player is, but the ticket tells you who people desperately want to see. And in Toronto, that ticket had Eala's name on it. The next chapter is already waiting. Toronto continues. Then comes Cincinnati. Then the US Open. Every tournament now has a reason to watch the numbers around Eala. How quickly do her sessions sell? How many fans travel to see her? How much does the audience grow after another victory? Those are questions that did not carry the same weight a few months ago. Now, they do. And there is one final detail that makes this entire story even more remarkable. The crowd did not wait for Eala to become a global superstar before believing in her. They arrived while she was still becoming one. They bought the tickets before the ranking caught up. They filled the stadium before the Ursum was complete. And when her body began to struggle against McNally, they did not disappear. They stayed. They carried the atmosphere. And for a few critical moments, it looked like the player was carrying the weight of an entire nation. Maybe that is what the ticket really proves. Not that Alex Eala has replaced Coco Gauff. Not that she has suddenly become the biggest player in women's tennis. And certainly not that she has finished her journey. It proves something much more important. Tennis now has another center of gravity. A new audience has found a player they can see themselves in. A country that once watched tennis from a distance now has someone standing on the biggest stages wearing its flag. And Toronto became the place where the sport could no longer ignore the scale of that connection. 3 months ago, that ticket was just a piece of paper. Then Eala's name appeared on the schedule. 30 minutes later, thousands of people had decided they needed to be inside that stadium. That is not the end of Alex Eala's story. It may be the moment the rest of the tennis world finally realized the story had already begun. And now, everyone wants to know the same thing. How far can she take it?